Bon après-midi tout le monde. Good afternoon everyone. My name is Edward Duffus. I work for Plan International and I'm proud and privileged to represent the API CRVS core group and to give details and present to you the work which we are doing to create the guidebook on CRVS digitization. So this is a very concrete initiative the API CRVS core group is working on to help countries develop ICT solutions to support CRVS systems in their countries, and builds very much on the principles mentioned by Raj before. In this presentation, I'm going to explain, firstly, why this guidebook is required, but I think after Raj's presentation, I think that's quite clear, what it is for, what it will contain, who is involved, and finally, and importantly for everyone, when will it be ready? So why the guidebook? So almost all countries now recognize the potential for ICT solutions to strengthen CRVS in their countries. They recognize the huge potential of ICT to help provide services in hard-to-reach areas, to improve accuracy of data, to streamline processes, to provide secure storage and archiving, to safeguard the privacy and confidentiality of personal data, to provide access to data, and critically, to provide the means for interoperability of systems such as civil registration of vital statistics, health, national ID, and so on. And this is a small list. There are many more characteristics and potential, of course. So we all understand now this potential, but how do we actually achieve this? And this is really the question which we're trying to answer with this guidebook. So unfortunately, here we have, unfortunately, a knowledge and capacity gap. Currently, there is a lack of practical documentation and guidelines to assist countries to take full advantage of the many benefits that digitization can provide and guard against the associated risks of using technology. So the lack of guidance has led to a number of problems as we inevitably cut corners. So for example, taking a solution from one country and trying to make it fit in the context of another country almost certainly ends in failure. Secondly, taking a manual process and merely automating it still leaves you with the same troublesome manual process. You just automated it. So without conducting the necessary re-engineering the process, you can run into problems. Okay. And thirdly, we notice around the continent that projects tend to be small in scale and not sustainable in the long run because a strategic view has not been taken when conceiving the project. And finally, too much onus is often put on the software vendors for describing and defining the solution rather than the CRVS stakeholders of government and in country. So put simply, the guidebook aims to bridge this knowledge gap. So what will the guidebook provide? The guidebook will provide, firstly, step-by-step guidance of how to identify information systems and technologies that are appropriate to the country context. This means systems that will be feasible and cost-effective to implement. Following this guidance, countries will define for themselves the holistic and interoperable systems that are capable of supporting CRVS. And by effective, we of course mean universal, continuous, permanent, compulsory, and confidential. So apart from the guidance, the guidebook will also provide supporting assets which are generic, in fact, to most implementations. As Raj mentioned, the process of civil registration of vital statistics is not that complex. And so a lot of it can be standardized and reused in a generic basis. These tools will help speed up implementation and ensure that the appropriate standards are being followed in all countries. We're only in the process at the moment of developing the guidebook. but I thought I would share some of the principles which underpin the way in which it's being created, which make it different from typical documentation. So firstly, the guidebook will be flexible, so that it is relevant and applicable for all countries, independent of specific contexts and IT system maturity. Second, it's targeted to the audience. The content will be primarily for those responsible for delivering civil registration and statistical services in country, and will provide them with the necessary guidance so that they can define the requirements for the information systems to support their core functions. There will also be detailed sections for more technical staff members, but the majority of the material will be aimed at CRVS decision makers. Thirdly, it will be standards and rights-based. The guidebook will be based on the UN principles and recommendations for CRVS and will incorporate a rights-based approach. It will be an online guidebook, which means it will be a living document. The guidebook will be published online so that the materials can be kept current, and the online format will mean that it will be intuitive and present information in practical, bite-sized chunks for the user. The guidebook will also be methodology-led. The guidebook will focus on the methodologies, the how-to, required to analyze and implement systems that derive the maximum value from digital technologies for the specific country context. It will also be asset-driven. So through the guidebook, sample artifacts and templates and reusable materials will guide the audience and prevent rework of standard processes and system specifications. It will be technology agnostic. So out of principle, fixed software and technologies will not be recommended by the guidebook. Instead, the guidance will help specify the system requirements as an input to the procurement process. And lastly, it will be open and collaborative. This means that the guidebook will be based on country experiences, and once published will continue to grow and develop based on the inputs from all stakeholders. So, to understand the way in which the guidebook is organized, we need to first reflect on how we can align CRVS functions with the IT which needs to support it. So how do we ensure that the IT we choose responds to the business need? And by business, we really mean the business of CRVS in this context. To do this, we need to define a number of things according to the following hierarchy. Firstly, you need to define your strategy and vision for CRVS, both in a holistic sense, for example, through the comprehensive assessment, but also for digitization. So understanding the long-term CRVS vision and objectives. Only then can you start looking at the business processes, which Raj mentioned in his presentation. So we need to understand how to deliver effective CRVS services and what re-engineering of that process is required when we take advantage of technology. Then and only then can we look at understanding what systems and data to use in information systems. And finally, we understand what technology to use. So what I really want to emphasize here is it's only at that final stage in this process of this methodology can we understand what technology actually to use. And I think there are country examples where the technology is leading the process, as Raj mentioned, a solution looking for a problem. So here we're putting the problem first and deriving it from the strategy, the business, and the information systems, and then we define what technology can support it. Oops. So this diagram gives an overview of the content which will be in the guidebook. So it's in its early stages, so there may be changes to this, but this gives an overall view of what it will contain. So on the far left-hand side, you have the far left and right-hand side, you have the inputs and outputs of the CRVS digitization project. And this emphasizes CRVS digitization must be conducted within an integrated program of CRVS strengthening, such as defined already in CRVS strategic plans. So in that sense, the CRVS digitization is one component of a CRVS strategic plan. So it cannot be a project which is isolated from the other CRVS strengthening projects, as they're all interrelated. So the CRVS digitization guide follows the 3 high-level phases of any IT project. There's the plan phase, analyze, and then implement. And so the guidebook follows this process as well. In the plan sections of the guidebook, we'll provide guidance on how to create a long-term vision for CRVS and the digitization of CRVS, and the digitization business case. The long-term vision takes a look into the future. What do you want your CRVS system to look like in the long term? Will it need to integrate with other systems? How much of it will be automated? This is important, as to develop a digitization roadmap, you will need to have a view of where you want to go in the future. The business case for digitization is important, as it will provide the arguments, the evidence, the justification for the spend on ICT to support CRVS, and can be used internally or externally, of course, to increase financial commitment. The central section, Analyze, is the core section of this guidebook. It provides the step-by-step guide of how to define the information system architectures, as we call them, that are appropriate for the country. As per the previous slide, this starts with a strategic vision, before looking at the business processes of CRVS, and then the information systems and solutions that can best support CRVS in the country context. As this analysis is completed, many factors are assessed that will influence the digital solution that best suits the country context. Among these are the legal frameworks in country, the current business processes and their re-engineering, cultural practices in country, the current bottlenecks of registration and the barriers to registration currently, organizational structures, capacity levels, and ICT and mobile infrastructure in country, on which systems will actually be based. Of course, if a CRVS comprehensive assessment has been completed already, much of this information will already be available, but now it will be used to define the technology solutions for CRVS. The final outputs of this phase are the system specifications themselves that will define the technology solutions to be implemented. So then we move to the implement phase. So this is where the systems are actually built, tested, and deployed for service. The guidance in this section will cover how to plan and monitor the implementation project, how to procure software solutions so that vendors are effectively managed, and how to ensure the smooth transition to new roles and processes that is often called change management. In addition to the guidance, you can see at the bottom, we have CRVS Digitization Toolbox. So in addition to the guidance, the guidebook also provides a toolbox of helpful templates and standards. Sample implementation plans and standard system requirements, for example, will help speed up implementation and mean that core CRVS functions do not need to be reinvented. So let's take a quick look at one example of what we mean by such an asset. So this is a standard business process. This one is for birth registration that we've already started working on. I just want to show you some of the features of this. Of course, this process is a direct translation of the UN principles and recommendations for vital statistics. This business process will be provided in an online format, but also as a template to be used when re-engineering business processes. So it's as helpful as possible to those carrying out the project. The online format allows for easy cross-referencing, as you can see on this diagram. Highlighted on the slide are 2 important references. The first is the link to the data dictionary, which defines the standard set of data required for the process. So in this case, birth registration and the elements of data which need to be captured at birth registration. The second is the link to the UN guidelines, which offers practical guidance on this step of the process. In this case, we link to the specific paragraph related to this part of the process to give the necessary references within the principles and guidelines. So in terms of planning, we have now formed a project task force which will lead on the creation of the guidebook. An expert group to support the creation of the guidelines will be formed during this conference. And finally, we expect the first version of the guidebook to be available online by September 2015. And I look forward to sharing the completed guidelines with you next time. Thank you very much.